What would you do if... Hello, and welcome to Creative by Konstantin, where we give you life hacks from music's best. Today, my guest is Pierre van der Westhuizen, a director of Gilmore Awards and Festival, and we're going to talk about a life in music, what it means to be a musician who influences others, and of course, how to survive a competition circuit as a poet and an artist, and come out on the other end with valuable lessons that one can offer to our community. Thank you for joining me, Pierre.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you too. And you know, very unoriginally, I like to start at the beginning. Do you remember what was the first inkling in your soul towards music when you began playing the instrument?
Absolutely. It's my grandparents on my dad's side. I used to go visit them in the summers, and he played, there was an organ, a Hammond organ, and a piano in the dining room.
Oh my God.
And so we would always just go straight to the piano or the organ and sing and play. And it's so deeply emotionally connected, that connection I had with my grandparents, to do that from a very young age, that although I didn't begin formal piano lessons until I was, I think, 12, almost 12. But I was improvising, playing at the piano, just messing around. And it was just that really settled. And once I started with formal lessons, like you just know, it kind of grabs you.
Of course. Were any of your family members professional musicians?
No. Now, on my wife's side and Sophie's side, her mother is a professional concert pianist and worked at the conservatory and everything. So, but no, my grandfather, he had such a beautiful voice that he actually went on tour with a troupe around the country as a young man, but then, was told by his family he needed a serious job, a real job. And, it was a very different time, but was passionate about music always, and always encouraged me in what I was doing.
Oh, how beautiful. Well, it's similarly, my parents aren't musicians, they're visual artists, but having pianos around, that's essentially how I got involved, just having musical instruments and having musical family members, I think it inadvertently draws you towards.
Yeah, I remember seeing that your parents are visual artists, and same with me. My dad is a visual artist, and so my piano growing up would be in his studio, and so he would be painting while I was practicing, and he loved it. I always wondered if it would bother him, but he always said no. It helped him, and it's fun.
Yeah, isn't that, because my parents have their studios, or they began to have their own studios, I think, just when I was a child. But I know that when I was a kid, like my mom would just paint as I practiced or draw me, and my sister, who's a visual artist, she would literally sit me down and like make etude drawings of me practicing as I was at the piano. So we all lived on top of each other.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's very special too. But I found, to me, it was very wonderful that my parents were not professional musicians, because I didn't have that stage parenting situation.
Same. Absolutely.
Which I observed so much with our colleagues who come from, musicians dynasties.
Yeah, it was, I would come home, and say, oh, great news, I won such and such competition. And they said, oh, you had a competition today? That's great. Good for you. There was no pressure at all, but just support. Just, keep going. This is wonderful, but very hands off. And actually it would make me nervous whenever they when they showed up. And I said, just, I'll let you know when I need you to come. But
that's great. If there was ever a recipe, I think, for a healthy state of being for a music student, that would be the perfect cocktail. It
Yeah, I think so. Now I say that, and then, you know, we have I have four little children, and but I love practicing with them, sitting with them, and um, and sometimes getting a little emotional myself, or maybe a little uh, pointed, um, but always try to keep in mind that what my experience was. So, try to keep that healthy balance with
yeah.
no pressure on there's no expectation that you have to become a professional musician. But when you're working on this little Mozart piece, well, Dad, I do want you to, notice the articulation.
Of course. How old is your oldest?
He is 11. Hard to believe.
Wow, a
Yeah,
teenager.
almost.
Congratulations. This is,
Acting like one.
are your kids, obviously they're probably into music to an extent, but do you feel that there is a real passion there?
They are. They love it. I mean, I think the oldest, he's much more into computers, and that's his passion, and that's great. Um, but he plays piano and violin, and they all do. But I think the one that's really the bug bit him is our third, Ian. He goes to the piano constantly, and with no prompting. And whenever we're looking for him, he's at the piano. So then you just know, there's no prompting. So it
Okay.
seems to be the little fire is there.
Wonderful. That's so good.
Yeah, it's
Well,
fun.
I'm not surprised because having two wonderful pianists for parents at the house, I'm sure
Oh, you're
that
very
that
kind.
does rub off in a way. Um, do you, because I know, of course, you and your wife, Sophie, are a duo. Do
Yep.
you practice at home when the kids are around
Oh,
together?
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Ever since they were babies. I remember one of our concerts, Sophie was like 8.5 months pregnant, about to go into labor, and we still played a concert. So it's been around them, part of their lives, always. And it sometimes a bit of a problem because we would always encourage movement, when sometimes we would just play for them and have them express what they're feeling in movement. And we would get calls from the school saying, we have a problem with Jean Pierre, our oldest. He's in choir and we can't get him to stand still.
Well, that's a good problem
So,
to have,
I
actually.
know. I said, well, that's all my fault. Very sorry.
Do they duo up amongst themselves ever?
They not so much. I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's interesting because it just like typical siblings, it devolves into fighting very quickly.
Okay, I hear you. I hear you. So when do because I know you also compose. So did you start composing at the same time when you started playing the piano, or did that join in later?
It was all part of it. The Yeah, and I think particularly because I didn't start formal lessons until later. I improvised all the time. Constantly, that was it. That was my life. Um, and I did take composition in undergrad, but unfortunately, these days and for a long time now, I haven't really, composed seriously. It's takes an enormous effort and a lot of energy. I appreciate when everybody else does that, but it makes me appreciate so much those pianist composers who are working today, like Daniel Trifonov and Marc-Andre Hamelin and Stephen Huff. Um, I think it's so important. It's so vital, and I wish that it would become part of the conservatory curriculum again. That it would almost be mandatory that musicians, the instrumentalists, have to compose as well, because I think it just gives you a completely different perspective
Oh, absolutely.
as a musician. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, as a someone who basically composed throughout my whole life and in education, I mean, it just makes you understand the music in a 3D way. You know, I always
Oh
say
yeah.
you become aware of its environment
Right.
in which you live. So it
Yeah.
helps across the spectrum of things, including,
Hmm.
with memory and and
Oh,
all these
everything.
things.
I don't know how you would truly deeply understand the structure of a piece if you weren't taught to build it from scratch yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Do you,
So
in your composition lessons, was there a particular structure? Was there something that like your composer instructor would do with you every lesson?
yes, there was a lot of analysis and copying. You know, I would and what I loved is the composition teacher and the piano teacher um, were always in consultation with each other about me. And so part of my piano lessons, I would have to start by writing. I did the entire Bach Preludes and Fugues in my first year, freshman year. And I would have to, before the start of every lesson, I would have to write each fugue out by memory that I'm going to play that day. Um, and I mean, you know, most kids, when you know, students these days, when you expect something like that, I mean, it would be tears and they would probably sue me, you know, how dare you? Um,
I hear you. Yes, absolutely.
it's become such a consumerist mindset, you know, whereas I think when you and I were going through it, it was like no pain, no gain, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was just no, you know, kind of normal. It was
Yes, right.
expected.
And
You
I
know,
loved it.
yeah,
Didn't feel pain. I loved it. I loved having that challenge. Yeah.
yeah. The reason I asked it because I suspected it might be similar to how my composition lessons were,
I was
because
going to
it was
ask.
sort of Russian German school, I guess, from the really second to last century. It's a
Mhm.
19th century, sort of late 19th century, early 20th century approach to a very scientific approach to music, which is
Yeah.
good, particularly I found, you know, in the developing stages of music education.
Right.
I had to write out fugues. We had to, or you would have to play, say, two, three voices and sing one of the other
Yeah.
ones at the same time, right? And not everybody was ever perfect at it, but it was just something you had to do. And like my composition teacher made me improvise on even a silly motive or something, but it had to be a fugue, or it had to be close to a fugue quality
Yeah.
imitation, following
Yes.
the voice leading, you know,
Yeah.
not just sort of playing whatever,
Yeah.
but sticking to the rules. And
Yeah.
that was every lesson, you
Yeah.
know, it just how the lessons began. And
Yeah. And I've been asked a lot over the years, you know, speaking, you mentioned the competition circuit at the beginning, and every time we would have, when I was at the Cleveland competition, you know, and I would always be asked by the audience members, well, where are all the American kids? You know, what's the difference between the American system and everybody else? Why, you know, well, a lot has changed in, you know, just in the past decade or two.
yeah,
We can't really speak of an American versus a Russian versus a German. I mean, it's all become one global artistic community.
yes,
But at that time, back at the beginning, I used to say, well, you know what, I taught college here in the US for a while as well. And I was really sort of taken aback that there were very minimal theoretical compositional requirements for the students um,
yes,
to gain entry to study music. Where if we wanted to go and study music, you know, we would have to write a three-part fugue for an entrance exam. You know, it would be four-part harmony, you know, oral dictation, all of this stuff. Um, so the fundamentals, just starting off the bat, was so much more expected of you. And I just think as a baseline, um, that always took me by surprise. Now, in the end, you know, those it kind of it all equals out. But I felt that um, a lot of kids were tripped up by that they were sort of that had that deficiency there to make up for.
yeah. No, I mean, that was my experience when I came, you know, to Juilliard, which is of course is an extraordinary school.
Yeah.
And I was 18. I was coming into my freshman year of college, of
Mhm.
bachelor's, and you know, straight from Moscow. So I had just graduated from the central school, you
Yeah.
know, where, you know, at that final grade, you know, our dictation would be like a Scriabin prelude or
Right.
Shostakovich prelude that you had to
Crazy.
write down
Yeah.
in eight playings. You know, you
Yeah.
only got eight playings, and then you have to turn in your paper. And so I kind of had the expectation to be put through the same type of ringer, and then it was like, where's the middle C, you know? And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it was on one hand a very welcome relief of the constant, you know, anxiety over this,
right.
but on the other hand, I did see that it's not that it's such an advantage to have that
It
stricter
is.
early training, because it comes in so handy
Yeah,
right away in a
right,
professional life, in the beginning of
right,
a professional life.
right.
So of course the curious, good musical minds that really, you know, fully care end up self-educating and catching up, but it
True.
takes time.
It does.
And
It
so you
does.
kind of have a bit of a head start there.
Yeah.
And uh, so when you moved from South Africa to United States, was it to teach already, or did you continue your education in the United States?
No, it was to continue education. Sophia and I both came, and we ended up completing our DMAs or doctorates in Cincinnati at CCM.
Great
Um,
school.
we loved it. We had a wonderful time. Although at that time, um, the area around the conservatory was pretty dodgy. Um, they have cleaned it up supremely well, of course, after we left. But we I mean, it was pretty rough. But the conservatory itself is this spectacular facility with, several recital halls and state-of-the-art equipment, and it was so vastly different from, sort of the rundown Yamaha uprights we were practicing on um, in South Africa. Um, but we didn't go there for the building. We went there for the
Of
teacher,
course.
Frank Weinstock. And that's something that I'm always, and I keep taking these little detours, but I am always amazed at uh, when you have academic institutions who tout all of their facilities and the state of the art, this and that and the other. Um, my focus has always been the faculty and, well, who teaches there and what have they produced? Who have they produced? Who have they come up with? Um, and so, our keen interest was in Frank Weinstock. He had a big South African connection. Anton Nell studied with him, and several others. And so we just hit it off, and we love him to death. I mean, he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And we were talking about all of this academic background, and he used to say, you know, because the preparation was intense. I mean, he was really wonderful, and you have to read this and study some other scores and look at the opera, look at this and all of the others. And then whenever the recital came, he would say, "Now, forget everything and just play."
Mm-hmm.
And I love that about him. Um, and one of the other things he always used to say is, "It's not about what happens because stuff happens. It's how you handle it, right?" And that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, you know, that is what I really began learning in my experience more when I was actually acting in theater in Moscow.
Mm,
Because in my music education in Moscow, which I was very fortunate to have amazing teachers, but it was in, it was 88 through 99, very symmetrical, right? So it was the very late 80s and through the 90s. It was the time where, of course, Russia as a country was going through such a change. Um, People were holding on to the tradition within the piano world
yeah.
with such almost suffocating grip,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
it was just very stressful all the
Sure.
time,
Yeah.
because you had to basically prove that you are worthy of walking the same ground that Richter did. I
Hmm.
remember one of my
That
teachers
could,
telling me, you'll never be as great as Richter, but you should die trying.
wow.
you know it didn't mean you die, but
No, I know.
it meant,
Right.
and that was not just aimed at me, it was at all
Yep.
students. That was the attitude, that
Hmm.
you'll never match that equal those grades of the past,
Right.
but your whole life you just have to sort of every day say, prove that you're worthy.
Yeah.
And I see why it might be incentivizing people to practice, but it also can create quite a mental challenge at the end of
Oh
the
yeah.
day.
And that I agree with you. This is what I love about this is why why you and I probably we kept staying in the States. And I love that free the mind, that
Yeah.
free your spirit. That freedom that is hard. And in South Africa, it was very much a similar to your experience. Like we would never be worthy of the European artists. Europe is this pedestal, and you can try your whole life, but it'll never be that. And even the way they graded you, a freshman would never be able to get an A, because an A is
Oh,
way up there. That's when you're perfect, right? So maybe by the time you're in your final year, you could
yeah.
maybe get an A.
We were great actually in central school. Our end of the year juries were graded on a 10 scale uh, uh, grade system.
Mhm.
So 10 being the absolute best, and then basically if you got anything below 7, you were kicked out. But
Wow.
the average was sort of 8 or 9.
Yeah.
Uh, and I mean, I have to say that I ended up getting 10s, but I mean, getting that 10 was the whole object of desire. I mean, you
Yeah.
spend countless hours practicing uh, just so that you keep your 10. And once you get it, you have to keep it, because they will
Yeah.
also hang on the door the ranking.
Wow.
So
That's
everybody's parents would
crazy.
be standing by the
Oh
door
my gosh.
to see the ranking of
Wow.
everyone. And once, and thinking that you try to get to number one, and then sort of your life is happy. But no, getting to number one is the beginning of the nightmare, because you have to stay on that list. It's like
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
Billboard or something.
Yeah.
Of course, it's so. So then, when I came to Juilliard, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, it's such a stressful environment," I was like, "It was a walk in a park.
Yeah.
It was so nice." And I just felt so good, and there was just such a sense of camaraderie, and kind of there wasn't this pressure of
Yeah.
constantly having to like prove that you're not unworthy.
Isn't that wonderful? Yeah.
It's
And that's
wonderful.
great. Yeah.
And that sort of gives me a very smooth segue into uh, uh, the world of piano competitions, which of course
Mm.
you're so familiar with. And just as a sidebar, I realized that you were a 2001 Cleveland piano competition in
I
in
was
the
in the
audience,
audience.
right?
Yes.
And
Yes. Well,
I was
it's,
actually in the competition that
I
year.
know.
It's just so incredible to think. It feels like it was so, long ago in a galaxy far, far
I
away.
know. And it always blows me away to think of these little congruencies our lives have, these
Yeah.
touch points, and then
Yeah.
somebody that is in an audience or is in an environment, and that years later you would interact with, and you have no idea that they were. I mean, it's just so crazy. But I knew you were in the. I mean, at the program and everything, so I knew you were in the competition.
Well, of course, I mean, I met you, some years later in the 2000s, when you were running it. And,
Right.
but I didn't realize that you were there in 2001 until
Yeah.
I saw it, you're talking about it. For me, competitions were the way to build the beginning of my career.
Sure.
And I've had
And
a
for many.
spectacularly positive experience.
Yeah.
And in particular, Cleveland, because, of course, I returned the second time in
Yeah.
2003. And I have never experienced not winning an award at a competition of that statue like Cleveland in 2001.
Mhm.
That was my case. I was in the semifinals.
Yeah.
But the audience and the competition themselves, really listened to me, and took a liking, and engaged me to come down for a soiree, and that made
And you
me
still have a huge fan base there.
thank you. I know, and that just is so humbling, and
Yeah.
because it's a lifetime now. It's
Yeah. Of
almost,
course.
we're almost 20th anniversary next year of my
Right.
first time
Isn't
doing
that
it.
wonderful?
And it is just because it stays with you forever,
Yeah.
if it's mutually cherished. Uh,
Hmm.
but I've never experienced any other competition where a non-prize winner would build this kind of relationship and a connection with the culture of Cleveland. And I have to say, Clevelanders are so into music,
Yeah.
and they really are not into contestants as artists, not just as contestants.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yes.
you know, you of course transformed it into a festival.
Mhm.
What does it take to take a competition with a reputation like Cleveland, which already has decades and decades of tremendous, you know, track record, but then to transform it into its basically grander, better future self?
It's focusing, as we talked about a minute ago, same as with academic institutions. It's focusing on the people, and you said it a second ago. Um, the focus was on contestants as contestants, and in so many other competitions that is the case. But they're artists. They're not just contestants. And if you start from there, that each of these 24, 28 pianists who come to Cleveland have a career in their own right. They've been already performing all over the world. They are accomplished musicians, and let's face it, just fascinating human beings. Um, Instead of number 22 on the list to come and play your Chopin etude, right?
Right.
Um, because seeing them as number 22 on the list to play the Chopin etude is sort of the juried version, right? And that's the whole competition version. As you have your time, number 22 is up, 15 minutes is over, you're done. It's very, very dry. It's very unmusical experience. Um, but when you turn it on its head and say, well, let's make it about this pianist and let's make it about um, his or her artistry and put it in let's celebrate that. Well, what does that look like? And then the rest follows easily,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
So from there we said, okay, let's change the format. People usually know applause was not allowed in the competition. So I said, just, I would come out and talk to the audience and I would say, cheer for them. If you have your favorites, I know. So holler for your favorites. Who cares? Let them feel welcome. And, if you appreciate it, even if it's in the middle of their, because they would have to not applaud between pieces. And I said, you
right.
feel free. And if you loved it, applaud. And I would tell the contestants, get up and take a bow. I don't care. You don't have to sit there like a statue throughout the entire round. So just freeing that up and,
Yeah.
and treating it more like a recital would.
Yeah.
That was a big mindset shift for the contestants. Um, and it made it so much more personal for the audience, of course.
Absolutely.
And then it easily flowed from there. Well, what other kinds of things happen at a festival? Well, there's some roundtables, there's master classes, there's films. We have parties, it's social gatherings. I mean, it really, when you start to focus on the people, what do people want to do?
Right.
They want to talk and they want to have fun. Okay, great. So it became,
Amen.
yeah, exactly. So, and the people who want to be involved, and then it became all of a sudden, we had so much more of Cleveland who wanted to participate and who wanted in on this. And then sponsorships became easy because once companies see and foundations see that the community is excited about this, then they start coming out to it as well. And so I was very, very fortunate in the way it was received.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and it made such a difference. It's coming back to the no applause. I actually honestly don't remember if that rule was still holding in 2001 at its Cleveland competition.
It, yeah,
I think so, but
it
I
was
can't
there.
recall.
Yeah, I was there, and I remember it. You applauded at the beginning, at the end, but
Right,
not
not
between.
in between, because I
Yeah,
remember, because having competed quite a lot, I remember all competitions had the same rule. It was kind of
yeah,
de rigueur of the day. The deafening silence is terrifying because
yeah,
you're sitting there and you're thinking, did it work? Did they like it? Or is it just
exactly.
terrible? And because with no feedback
Well,
in real,
musicians,
yeah,
exactly. You live for that feedback.
yeah,
That's exactly sets the tone for the next piece. This
yeah.
is why
So
you.
it's
Yeah.
so scary not to have it. Actually, that can alone create anxiety that will just overdrive you
Yeah.
immediately. And I remember it was really taking enormous mental effort to keep from, running away, actually, from just feeling like you're not connecting with anyone.
Yeah.
And of course, in real life, in real career, and I love American audiences for it because they really show you what they feel. They
Oh, yeah.
don't follow any protocol at all. I so many times, and it's a great moment, when they plot between movements.
Oh,
I
yeah.
had to take bows after first movement of something like a Tchaikovsky.
Hmm.
It's 20-minute
Yeah.
piece with an
And why
enormous
not?
dancing. And
Why
why
not?
not? Yeah,
Yeah.
because if people want it, if you don't acknowledge them and if you don't get up and take a bow, then it's almost presumptive. You're almost dismissing their experience as nuisance.
I used to tell the contestants, I said, whether you like it or not, ladies and gentlemen, you're in the entertainment industry.
Yes.
Now we are dealing with very highbrow entertainment, but somebody bought a ticket to come and have a good time, right? And that is the American way.
Yeah.
So you just hit it on the head.
And I think, but it's a beautiful way because it really does.
Absolutely.
I mean, I noticed from my own experience, and I wonder if it's probably the same, I would wager a guess with you, is when you have taken a bow after the first movement and you know that they love it. I sit down and I'm so much better in the second and third movement than I would have been
Absolutely.
otherwise. Because that sense of gratitude from the audience just elevates my ability and my energy level, I don't the reason why am I here?
Right.
Well, that's
Well,
why.
and I also think it's really up to the performer to help guide the audience. If you really don't want them to applaud after the first movement, if it's something that it's just a fermata goes into attacca into the next movement, and you want to keep that, well, your body language can say that. You are the one, you're the conductor to this train. If you flail your arms, but there's a fermata that goes into the, well, look, guess what's going to happen?
Yes, absolutely.
So stage presence, and I don't think that that's really taught very often as well, is how to guide an audience, how to have that stage presence, and
Yeah.
and you know
Well,
walk
look,
through
it's
it.
very important. Developed, and I'm going to actually offer my course at Juilliard this fall, perhaps remotely even, narrative musicianship, which is essentially acting technique as
Mhm.
interpretation enhancement, and it includes everything, you're being on stage, and how to remain in the music's spirit and in
Yeah,
music's character, and that immediately solves that problem. That if you
right.
have a fermata or if you have a ending that doesn't warrant applause, if you're being narrative about it, your body will do it and the audience will know it and they won't jump
I'm
up and scream.
thrilled to hear this because I have been saying for such a long time that pianists should take acting classes. They should take conducting classes.
Yeah.
If an opera singer takes acting classes, that's music. I'm thrilled to hear this. It's just your entire body has to be in on this. You can't just, I'm not saying jumping around like a clown in front of the piano, but um, there it certainly makes it a lot easier when your body motions actually um, be more like, I'm not saying anything new, but be
Yeah.
more of a conduit to what you're trying to say, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I had an opportunity as a teenager I fell into acting actually, because they needed a young kid who could play the piano in a play. And then as the play began to be rehearsed, they, thought I had enough talent to actually sort of expand my part into a speaking part because it was really a walk on for 3 hour walk on
Wow.
playing. It became a small part with all sorts of, speaking in it, dialogue. So I kind of learned how to act on the stage of Moscow State Theater.
Hmm.
And that really changed my performing experience as a musician, as a pianist, because I began to see that it is all one thing, that there is no separation between being an actor and being a musician. It's all
Yeah.
storytelling. And also you can, once you see it that way, the anxieties that come with pure technicality of playing the piano kind of fade a little bit into the background because you realize that your real job is to tell the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how to do it best. Well, sometimes it requires a whole lot of octaves and scales and trills and double notes.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you're still telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's always when people ask me, what do you look for in a pianist? I always say I look for a pianist who makes the piano go away.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
exactly.
know?
That's beautiful. I love it. I've never heard that. I love it. I will
That's all
quote
I
you with
look
your
for.
permission. That's so good. Yeah. But it's just like,
You know?
my beloved Renee Fleming always says, I want people to forget I'm singing.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it's just about the music. It's about you and your craft and your art and making the music come alive. Really doesn't matter what instrument you use to do it,
Yeah.
you
A
know.
state of
So,
flow.
yes, exactly. Exactly. And I feel like oftentimes, so many times, the piano is the barrier between what the person is trying to say because there's maybe still some technical issues or the technical issues can be something as simple as uh, um, engaging the body and the movement and all of that. There's some barrier that's happening there. So I think this is you're onto something.
Well,
It's really
I'm,
good.
thank you. I'm very thrilled with it because, I spent essentially my entire professional career test driving it on me.
Yeah,
Because, and we're all human beings, so I had bouts of stage fright that was
yeah,
actually terrifying. I mean, I just couldn't breathe. There were
hmm,
moments I was so paralyzed by it.
sure,
Uh, and then I began to really analyze it and how where is it coming from?
right,
What is this? Because we activate our primordial fight of flight or fight
yeah,
mode, right? So it's either you have to, but if you fight, it comes from place of tension, right? You fight
yes,
for survival. It's very aggressive defense,
hmm,
and that actually is very counterproductive for performance because it
right,
actually builds a wall between you and the audience. You become sort of this caged animal that's
hmm,
lashing out at the piano or the world, at your own fears.
right,
So it is accepting the fear as part of it and then weaponizing it to your own benefit, right?
right.
Use the energy of fear and then relax into it, and then you can sort of work with this.
But that takes a lot of mental practice. I mean, it's a very, I being in music, this is not something anything new for you, but we're asking so much of people,
Yeah.
right? You're asking them to be a brilliant technician, brilliant at understanding the compositional structures, um, and then being brilliant actors in front of the piano, being brilliant spokespersons for that. I mean, we're asking so much of people, and this is why it's a field that very few survive in. Um, but fortunately, I think that the U.S. Um, provides for, because of the nature of this country that's very entrepreneurial, it provides space for so many different levels and abilities and interests in music that
Mhm.
um, fortunately not everybody has to be on stage at Carnegie to make a life in music, right?
Yeah.
So there's so many different things you can do. Um, but yeah, I mean, for those who do make the stage their living, um, it's almost insurmountable. But I read somewhere that most pianists are a little unstable because it's one of the few activities that you are faced with your own iniquities daily,
Yeah.
constantly, right? And it sort of does a number on you, right?
Absolutely. Well, you have to, and you can
Yeah.
never rest assured of anything
No,
because
no,
no matter how ready you are, no matter how experienced you are. I mean, I find this
right.
sometimes after God knows how many performances, I never counted them, but a lot. that I've given, sometimes I just feel at home and
Yeah.
amazingly comfortable on stage. And
Right.
then there are days that I just don't. And I can't
Right.
sometimes, it could be weather, it could be I slept on the wrong side or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just, the professionalism helps you to deal with it so that
Yep.
the audience is not aware and that they're
Yep.
getting a wonderful experience they paid for.
Right. I remember I had a nosebleed in the middle of a performance, and you just keep on playing. I mean,
I
just
know.
try and figure out, like,
Yeah.
you know, stuff happens,
I mean,
but
literally, I had recently, I was playing, actually, my last recital before the lockdown was in Georgia. And very grateful audience, was wonderful. Actually, the audience was all surrounding me, right? They put the chairs around the piano in
lovely.
complete circle. I love that because it's a 3D immersion experience.
Sure.
So, so cool. And actually, I was in the zone. It was going so well. And then some way through this, my foot cramped. The
Oh,
right, the actual instep of my
oh
right
no.
foot began to like went into a seizure.
Oh no.
I don't know why. I mean,
Yeah.
or the
Well,
same shoes
anything
I
can
usually
happen.
wear for performances. I mean, fancy but comfortable. I don't what have I don't know. The pain is unbelievable when that
Yes.
happens,
Yeah.
and usually you need to get up and really stretch. But how
Right.
do you do that when
Right.
you're playing Claire de Lune? It was in the middle of Claire de Lune, the
Oh
quiet moment
wow.
where you have to body language, you have to be still, right? You're at night, you're creating this, nightscape for people, not conducive to cramping.
No.
And if it were some Liszt passage, I could have risen a little bit or done some weight on my right foot. But there, my right foot's on the pedal. I'm supposed to keep pedaling, and
Oh
it's.
my gosh.
I mean, every fiber of my being, I had to make sure my face doesn't contort into
Yeah.
pain, which I was feeling. So I just clenched my jaw. I put the tension in my jaw, and the tears were just coming from people.
Wow.
I was so into music, and of course, no one, thank God, had an idea. And they were like, it was, so much tension and passion in your player. And I was, oh my God, if you
Yeah.
only knew that I was in pain and in tears, pain because my foot just cramped. But these things, and
Yeah.
you wish they
Happens.
don't happen at Carnegie Hall, but you never know.
You
You
never know.
just never know. And that not knowing is a wonderful, exciting bit about a live performance, but it also
Absolutely.
stuff that can terrify you and drive you somewhat crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. That, they used to
How
what? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask, how do you deal with sometimes these moments of either anxiety or, external discomfort that occur during your performances because you perform quite a lot and in a duo with your wife?
Hmm. Um, I feel like when that happens, that often happens um, when you start to feel a little bit dissociated. To me, when uh, people, they ask, well, what did you think of the middle of this Mozart? And I say, well, I actually was thinking, oh crap, did I lock the front door when we left the house? And then all of a sudden, when you have those little lapses
Yeah.
of concentration, and then all of a sudden you go, um, you know, but I think for me, it helps. I try to prepare myself as much as possible. And actually, I take a step back, and before I perform, we had a wonderful professor in South Africa who wrote a lot about linguistic techniques to program the mind. And so there's a lot like the night before or the day before, just visualizing yourself walking up to the stage, sitting down, and then getting back up and walking off just a few times. But
Mhm.
sitting down, take a deep breath and let that sort of, calm down, calm your heart rate, and then get up and go off. And then you come up again, and then you start to play. You calm down, calm your heart rate, and then you start to play a few phrases, but all in your mind the night before, and then stop and go back off, until so that by the time that you get there and you're on stage, it all feels so familiar, that whole experience, right? But I also find that what helps me quite a bit is when we're rehearsing the duo, is one of us would keep playing and then the other um, would just walk through the entire space, walk through the hall, and sit in several spots throughout the hall, and so that I get sort of a roadmap of the entire space in my mind, that I'm not just focused on the piano here. I don't know, for me, that somehow that helps, knowing mentally what that entire space feels like.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so all of these little techniques to try and make it feel your home, right? I
Yeah.
think that's part of it, because we as musicians, you're playing New Jersey one night and then Ohio another, and it's that all of these circumstances change, and where you practice the piece in your practice room is very different from where you're going to perform it, and so um, trying to get a handle on as many variables as you can, I
Yeah.
think helps me. So
Absolutely. Well, do you have also like your top three practicing techniques that are fail-safe for you that you always sort of go through in your daily work, but also before performance?
yeah, definitely score away from the piano. Again, because like I mentioned before, I love when the piano goes away in front of a musician. Well, the best way to practice that is step away from the piano. And it's something that I actually learned from other folks around me. But that works so well. Um, and then I just love sometimes taking a phrase by phrase apart, as even after everything we've performed it a number of times, and then just go back to taking a phrase by phrase apart, and just each note, living in each note, loving each note lovingly, taking my time. No, doesn't matter how long it takes to get through that one little phrase, um, and then we piece everything back together again. Um, so to me, that's very helpful. How about you? Do you have?
Absolutely. I have an interesting 50-50 split right now between playing new music a lot.
Hmm.
I collaborate with my friend and wonderful composer Polina Nazaikinska, who writes for me, which is a privilege beyond measure.
Mm,
It's such a joy to have music written kind of for you. So with
right.
your musicianship and your, pianism in mind, but that means I had to learn new stuff all the time, which is great. But
Yeah.
then I get to frequently, particularly with the concerti, I get to play the same ones, which is wonderful, but over and over again. And so what I do is I get brand new score every so
That's a
often,
great idea.
and I
Yeah.
try to not just replicate what I already have done or
Hmm.
determined that I'd like to do, but however many times I return to play the, I don't know, Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff too, I try to learn it anew, or
Yeah.
at least deconstruct it and put it back together again.
Exactly.
But I find that having a blank score is huge help in
Yeah.
that respect, because the moment I see the marks that I've written, last year or 10 years ago, I remember it, I recollect then writing them and what I
Yeah.
thought about it, and then you're locked into that idea,
Hmm.
and that prevents you from thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
my case, so I have to like
Right.
sort of, I'm very visual, so visual aids are important to me. So or lack thereof, so I
Right.
just remove them by getting a brand new score.
That's a great way. Yeah, I know, and it seems counterintuitive to take this, if you have a lot of reps to practice and a lot of pressure, um, and somebody says, well, I don't have time to then go back and pick it all apart and spend an hour on one phrase or half an hour on one phrase. I said, well, you'd be surprised. I didn't go through the entire work that way. Even if I take an hour and take some critical phrases, um, and just spend some really in-depth time and don't practice the whole piece, all of a sudden the entire piece feels different and fresh and new, just because I spent some time on a few key phrases. So it's I think it's counterintuitive that people want to get through the entire thing and practice everything every time. it's pointless, you know.
Yeah.
So
And with a long piece, I mean, it just takes forever because if your piece is 40 minutes
yeah, and you
long,
don't have the time, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
but I also find that when I was in my 20s and doing competitions, it was gobble gobble gobble, as much
right.
repertoire as possible, and that is
Yeah.
good when you're a young artist, when you're gathering the database, as I call
Yeah.
it, uploading
Mhm.
information.
Right.
But now I find this incredibly comfortable for me as a creator, as an artist, to be able to actually narrow my per annum repertoire.
Hmm.
So I don't have to play 25,000 pieces all at
No,
once.
no.
But I'd much rather play fewer things but better and dig deeper than just cover a lot of real estate musically.
Right. I'm much more interested. I don't, I really don't care if somebody becomes a specialist in one composer or several, a handful of composers. Um, because I do feel like we can go through several lifetimes and still not discover everything
Of
in
course.
all of the Beethoven sonatas. Um, but when you find somebody who makes that their life work and takes the time to show something different every time, why not? I think that's every bit as worthy and worthwhile,
Yeah.
um, because I'm much more interested in interesting playing than um, you know really impressive playing. That's, to me, that's not, impressive is fascinating and interesting. That's what I find impressive. you know
Couldn't agree
so
more, of
yeah,
course.
but that takes that really hard work of spending an hour and trying to say the same thing 10 different ways, right? um, Rather than practicing that phrase to death and making sure it's perfect. That doesn't interest me.
Yeah. Well, what I found also quite interesting once, and it was a function of circumstance, is that I started learning ballet doberman um, some years ago, and I knew how it goes, but I never actually played it until I was in my mid-20s,
Mhm.
and the piano wasn't around. I mean, I was literally at the beach somewhere, and but I had the music, so I took a pencil to it, and I analyzed the music, from a musical theory standpoint, but I started marking it up like a script. I
Yeah,
wrote the interpretation
fantastic.
in the music before I ever lay my
Right,
hand on it on the piano.
right.
And it was one of these kind of aha moments for me
Hmm.
because the whole piece came together so much easier and so much more
Right,
meaningfully when I actually began to learn the notes,
right.
that I've been kind of using that. This year I learned, Brahms' second piano concerto, and
Oh,
which has been my
what a
dream to play.
piece.
Finally, I got a contract to do it, and then it got canceled because of pandemic. But I'm going to do it in May of 2021 in California.
Fantastic.
And but in the process of learning it this year, I did basically the same thing. I took a pencil to the score, and before I started physically learning the notes, I created, a narrative
Hmm.
and assigned, states of mind,
Great.
characters, and things. And it just does, to me, make perfect sense because it
Yeah.
makes the experience more meaningful, actually
Hmm.
faster and more efficient because you kind of already know it. You just
Right.
have to teach your muscles to remember where to go,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
It's already in your mind, and memorization is automatically solved because
Yeah.
when you know the music, you know it. A
Right.
tiny lapse of a single note doesn't makes no difference.
You've basically learned the script before you started rehearsing.
Yeah, yeah. How do you feel about hands separate practicing?
It depends. I'm all for it in certain cases. Um, and even with duo practice, we've done several different ways where, depending on the texture, we would practice passages where it's just my left hand and Sophia's right hand, or vice versa. Um, because there's certain it depends. To me, it's all texture. It all depends on what you need to be able to show in a certain passage, um, and that you need to pay attention to. Um,
That's so
but if
brilliant. Yeah.
but if the texture is connected to the two hands, it's really, I don't see a point in separating them. But if it's Bach and you have three voices in one hand, we'll practice it with the one hand.
Yeah, no, you're so right. But it's fascinating to that you do that kind of practicing as a duo also. I
Right.
mean, that is what really separates duos from the duos. You know what I mean?
Well, it gives you a sense of balance as well, because there's nothing worse than, when you hear, like you said, that when you hear two pianists playing together, or is this an organism? Is this a single organism?
Yeah,
And then the way, and that's why we always say we don't rehearse, we practice as a duo, and that there's a very big difference when you're rehearsing with someone, a violinist or a cellist or another pianist. I mean, you have that 30 minutes or half an hour, and it's a very global macro level thing.
yeah,
um, but when you say bringing to practice together, well, then you start picking apart together
yeah.
and building back up together, and that's a very different experience.
Yeah, well, but that's where the in a way the true art really resides. Uh,
Absolutely. I
because I mean, I always say that I mean I love collaborative projects. I
mhm.
collaborate with very different musicians and creators. Right now, Paulina wrote a ballet, so I'm collaborating with the whole dance company because I actually
Fantastic.
sometimes play with one hand and my other hand and the left part of my body is involved in motion. So
Oh, wow.
she's composed the score, which allows me to be pulled away from the keyboard as I'm playing.
Fantastic.
Like say
That's
it's
really,
really amazing, but it's such
yeah,
a collaborative experience.
right.
But we rehearsed it a lot. So that is practicing together,
Yeah,
absolutely creating something. But a lot of the
right.
time when you have half an hour to put something together, you're in a damage control mode or what I call an
Exactly.
accommodation mode. You're
Exactly.
accommodating
Right.
everybody to make sure that it goes well.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's good to be able to do that, but that's not where the magic is.
Something that I used to do for my students with pedaling is I say, well, have somebody else play the piece and you pedal it, because there's nothing harder than pedaling for somebody else. And this works is so great for duo playing as well. So many times when I have to pedal when she is playing or the other way around. And my God, that kind of picking apart, that kind of it's a completely weird experience.
Well,
And
you have to
then
breathe with the other person.
you have
You
to
should.
breathe, you have to learn to play just by your ear. And like, and that's the whole point. You're a musician. You're these are your assets, your ears. So
Absolutely. Well, when
so
you play as a duo on one piano, do you split that pedaling sort of 50-50, or is it
it
just more of
falls
a team?
mostly when we're on one piano. I'm mostly secondo, and Sophia's
Right.
is primo, and so mostly the pedaling falls to me. Um, but yet we split depending on what the texture is or what's going on. Yeah,
Do you have a preference of one or two piano being duo?
I I love duo piano is simply because truly duet playing is so much harder because your space is just all of a
Yeah.
sudden, and your technique has to be completely different. Things that you were used to doing with your elbow now is completely on its head. It's very interesting choreography, but then at the same time, that's why I love duet playing, because of the choreography. It's so visually appealing. It's very fun.
No, I know. I have, of course, played it in a duo situations, but I find it so much more challenging to play four hands, one piano than,
Yes. Oh,
than
yeah.
playing two piano. I actually played double concerti once, which was an amazing experience. But that also will, give you a hair-raising
Yeah.
moment because you're not only tracking the orchestra and the conductor, but you're
Oh, yeah.
tracking another
Right.
pianist on a
Right.
piano that is quite far away from you, and I don't
Yeah.
see very well, so
Right.
I can't really, see entirely their face
Yeah.
because I just don't see very well.
Right.
So I remember just being like seriously bamboozled by it. Have you ever played the double concerto with Sophie?
Yes. Yeah. Same experience. Yeah. It's very, very interesting. But that's why when I say when you're one organism, it makes it so much easier, because I know, I kind of don't have to really, by the time we get to the orchestra, I don't really have to pay attention to Sophie or her to me. Our, what we tend to breathe as one, we are one. And then the orchestra is is so much easier. when, but I've witnessed too many times where the two pianists meet each other the day before and put it together, and they on the orchestra, and you can tell. It's just, you can tell.
Another question: have you ever conducted while playing a concerto?
No, like, I can't even imagine.
Would you like to do that one day?
I think it'd be wonderful. I have conducted several times, symphonies and so on, which that's such a wonderful experience, and I encourage everybody to take a stab at conducting, no matter how terrifying it is. Um, but talk about learning to breathe, and learning to breathe with musicians, and learning to cue and all of that good stuff. Makes for the collaborative experience so much more rewarding when you have all of those things in place, right?
I
But
haven't yet, but I'm just dying to do it.
oh, I think it'll be so much fun. Yeah, but terrifying. I know that I think it is Lars Vogt in Germany who he has this program where the young musicians who are part of it, part of the festival is they have to play and conduct as well, which I think it's a skill. And again, we talk about pianist composers a little minute ago. I think that was also part of it. If you were the Mozart or the Beethoven of the day, you were playing your own music and you were conducting from the keyboard.
Oh, absolutely.
And how far we have come from that. You know, years ago, I had a wonderful conversation with Joel Smirnoff, who was then president at CIM when I was still in Cleveland. And he said, if somebody like Bach auditioned at CIM today, we wouldn't know what to do with him. Because here would be a kid who builds his own instruments, composes, tours the country playing, piano and organ, um, writes, opera and masses and all of these things. What would we do with a kid like that? And that made him really rethink and reevaluate. And I thought it was such a perceptive thing to say.
Oh, yeah.
So
I think I try to constantly remind myself that being a musician is the times may change, but the essence of what we do hasn't really.
right,
So we're doing the same thing really. We're
right.
just living in a different century.
Absolutely.
And that sort of, to me, somehow romanticizes the notion of freedom within it. So like I always do my own cadenzas for all classic concerti.
Fantastic.
Even if there is an original by the composer, even if Brahms had written a genius one, I will still do my own. Not because I want to compete with the greats of the past, but just because that is what you're supposed to do, right? That's the moment of creation.
Yeah.
And have you done that also? Your own cadenzas?
Very, very little. I mean, but I applaud that. I think that's wonderful. Marshall Griffith, also at CIM, he does wonderful talks and wonderful demonstrations on improvisation of your own cadenzas and so on. I think it's a marvelous thing to do.
I usually write them out just because I really do, want to make them good pieces of musical entity.
Yeah.
And the key there, but say if one were to improvise it, you have to be so clear with your body language when you're ending, so conductor doesn't misread you and enter the orchestra at the wrong time, or if or if you're finishing and the orchestra doesn't come in. I mean, those are the practicalities of thinking about it.
Being here at the Gilmore, I started to delve into a lot more jazz, because jazz is a big part of the festival. And, talking to these jazz musicians all over the world, I don't know how many classical musicians or classical audiences realize what masterful composers these people are. Because in order to improvise at such a genius level, you truly are a composer. You are composing on the spot and creating a larger compositional structure on the spot, which is it's genius. And I just think we in the classical world have a lot to learn. Can learn a lot from these jazz masters.
Oh, absolutely. I, believe it or not, took jazz improvisation back in Moscow on
Yep.
Saturdays. We had
Fantastic.
like,
Good.
because jazz scene is very alive in Russia.
Yep.
Contrary to, I don't know if people know it, but it is very beautiful and vibrant scene. But it's of course transplanted from America. Many of the
Right.
Russian jazzists, learned it here. And so it was like one of these, if you want to do it on Saturday, come and do it
Right.
thing. And I remember just having um, my mind majorly exploded by how structural it is,
Yeah.
and yet how you kind of relax into it. So there's this freedom that sits
Right.
in a grid,
Right.
and it's kind of almost opposite things, but they'll combine beautifully.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
it's immediately apparent when a jazz musician, when you can tell when there is no foundation, when there's no grounding in proper training, right? And I've met so many jazz pianists who have classical training
yeah,
behind them, and it makes all sense, So
yeah,
at
absolutely.
any rate,
Well, speaking of Gilmore, how do you, what are the plans for this upcoming season? Because I'm, obviously with the situation, everything is sort of rescheduled and redone.
yeah. So we probably won't be going into a concert hall anytime soon, right? We've been doing a lot of informal surveys with audiences, and most people say that they would not feel comfortable going to a concert until there's a vaccine available.
Hmm.
Um, Even with social distancing guidelines, even with all of the mitigation efforts, um, it would just be and for us, then the conversation becomes, well, so say we can go back to a concert hall March or April, um, under limited circumstances, what would that even look like, and how do you adequately contain audiences? How do you really protect someone? Um, you know, it's a liability that it's a big thing to think about and take on. So I just decided, we decided as an organization that we are going to take next season just completely online, and so we're in the middle of figuring all of that out and how will that actually look and how would that work. Um, I mean, we did virtually Gilmore, where we did a combination of archive material and some new live things and so on. This will be all live, all new. Some musicians will be able to get here, some won't. Um, so it's created a flurry of activity, but I think, um, first of all, it'll be appreciated that we have people's health in mind when we're doing this. I don't want to put people in a position where they have to make a choice, and it's the health of the artist that I want to keep in mind as well. But at the same time, I want to keep them working. I
Absolutely.
do not want to go dark for this season. Musicians all over the world are suffering, and we need to figure out a way to keep the music going, keep them working. Um, so we're going to figure this out, and working. They're all going to be highly produced, multiple cameras and beautiful HD quality sound. And we found a space here in Kalamazoo where we'll do it from. And so the pianist will come here, but there won't be an audience. Um, but I find it exciting. Again, we were talking about a second ago, but I find it such an exciting challenge. And I think actually it's going to create a moment in time where the world and musicians find themselves interacting more deeply than they ever would, because you can connect in a real way, say through a Zoom meeting beforehand or a Q&A, or with the way people are interacting on the live streams, um, and having the artist spend some time with the audience who tuned in, um, that most people go to a concert and then go home. So this will create that added interaction with us as an organization, with the musicians. So I'm kind of excited about that. I
Yeah,
think it'll be
added
interesting.
value.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly,
No, I
exactly.
think it's brilliant. Look, in every circumstance, however nightmarish it may be, such as pandemic, it sort of pushes us to invent something, right? To
Yes.
reinvent something. And all the technologies, were already around. No one was really using them or thinking about
No,
them.
and it's changing rapidly. There's so many developments. Stay tuned. I mean, one of the things that we're looking at is AR, virtual reality experience. I mean, it's going to be, so there's all kinds of fun things that you can do with this. It'll be
This is
very
so
interesting.
incredible. Yeah, because
Yeah,
imagine if you could place an audience member on that stage during the
it's
performance.
coming.
I can't wait for this. This is so amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Oh, but that's,
Yeah,
that's the incredible excitement and beauty of living in 2020, right?
exactly.
Is the only global pandemic that we're experiencing virtually, and that we're
Hmm.
as interconnected more than ever before.
Exactly. Now more than ever, exactly. This is where people are living. They're living in the online space, and this is where you have to meet them,
Yeah.
right?
And
So,
then there are so many creative opportunities there. It's just so exciting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm
And
excited.
well, and I'm sure so is everybody who's watching.
Thank you.
And to top it off, my favorite few little questions, simple question, simple answer. What would you say to yourself at 20?
Knowing what I know now,
Yes.
chill out. I would say, um, when you tell God your plans, he's just going to chuckle, right? Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah,
just, yeah. You can all the best laid plans. You can plan as much as you want, um, but keep being. Life will continue to surprise you. It's amazing. I would have no idea at that age where I'm sitting now. So, and it's thrilling. It's exciting.
indeed. What would you recommend to a young pianist who is about to embark on a competition career?
I would say don't take the competition itself too seriously, but take the art seriously, you know, because there's always going to be a next competition and a next one and a next one, but there's only one you. So take your craft, what you're trying to do, and who you are trying to be. Focus on that. The competition is just a platform. It's a point in time.
Beautiful. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Um, Gosh, where do I pick? Um, I just reread Lord of the Rings, so I'm gonna have to say
That, that's great. That's so Wagnerian, isn't it?
yes. It
Um,
remains a favorite.
yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
a great book.
yeah.
What would you recommend to a parent of a music student?
Parent of a music student. Um, I would say that the pressure that your child is under is already so great, um, that just be there, just support, just be there, be a sounding board, just support them and love them. This the path they're embarking on is emotional, it's rocky, it's wild, it's raucous, it's all over the place, it's intense. They don't need another voice saying, what we expect. They just need somebody to say, "Hey, I'm here." That's really the important thing. When I was in Cleveland, I started the youth competition as well, and you would see all these parents of these young kids show up and sit there in the practice room with them and be at every round, be backstage, and just um, but the kids who did well later on after the competition and who still have big careers, those are the parents who I see. They show up, but they just show up. They're just there to support. That's the whole idea. That's the whole
That's
point.
beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So
the ideal situation.
Yeah.
And finally, what would you say to a music teacher?
Oh, it's a music teacher. Um, you are tasked with something incredibly special, and that is not just molding a pianist, a musician, but you're molding a person. Because what we're dealing with here is alive, it's dynamic, it's emotional, deeply emotional, and don't forget to pay attention to the person as well.
Yeah, that's
You know, I think because more than anything, the successful musician is somebody who knows themselves and who knows what he or she wants out of life and what they want to say. And a good teacher enables that.
that's so right and so beautiful.
Well,
And on this
is
poetic note,
thank you.
thank you so much for being with me and for sharing your thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you much for having me, Konstantin, and good luck with everything.
Thank you. You too. I'm so eagerly anticipating the virtual reality from Gilmore.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Pierre.
Bye bye.